January 2014. A scene familiar to many Americans in a place not too far from U.S. shores. Though we are not physically separated by much, the palm curtain certainly divides us with red tape and confusing laws. Cuba? I know! I thought Americans couldn't visit Cuba, period. There is so much smoke and mirrors surrounding that island that I'd been convinced that country was just a myth, and it wasn't even really there. It's still there. All 42,400 square miles of it, trapped in time. To know what Cuba is like today, you need to know something about its recent history. It being an island dependent on trade, it has a history of not being able to survive on its own, which primarily has driven her past, with numerous rebellions as a close second. First Spain, then the US, then Russia, and now without first world country support, Cuba searches for its next economic crutch. Ironic because the Castro family has the country locked into what we decided to call Castroism, which is sort of a mix between socialism and communism. The biggest recent entry to their logbook is Obama opening up diplomatic relations with this struggling third world country, so we wanted to expose Cuba as it is now before an influx of cash and outsiders has a chance to have any effect. On the travel front, only certain types of general licenses for visiting Cuba are permitted, including people visiting close relatives, researchers, humanitarian people-to-people tours, and journalism. From the United States, there are no planes to fly there, and obviously no roads to drive there, so the plan was to sail there from West Palm Beach, Florida. Director 40, crew of 3. Duncan Spencer, the owner of the boat, Dave Dunnigan, the navigator, and me, Ashley Love, with several cameras to document the trip. I purchased my ticket down to Florida and flew down to meet up with the boys already down there doing repairs. I arrived cameras in hand as instructed on the 11th of January 2014. There's something so comforting about a checked bag coming down that railing and knowing you haven't lost it yet. Pretty quickly after meeting Duncan and seeing Duncan and Dave interact, I could sense a history between these two.
Hi there, Ashley.
Hi! It being my first real offshore experience, I decided I better sit in the back quietly while those two bickered about directions. I prayed they were better at navigating at sea than on land.
I was asked to do a delivery in 1985 on a boat called Donnybrook. And the night we were supposed to leave, it was raining, and I saw a giant dumpster. And I jumped right in, and inside the dumpster was another man. This man, Duncan Spencer. And that's how we met, in the bowels of a Dempsey dumpster.
The dumpster happened back in '83, I think it was. And there are a lot of miles.
1883.
A lot of miles between 1983 and this year.
Madam X was in the water already when I arrived on the dock, and from the moment I saw her, much of my anxiety was eased. She was striking.
I fell in love with Madam X 8 years ago when I chartered her. It was like meeting a girl of a special type that you know that's the girl for you. It happens to men, sometimes frequently, sometimes only once, but I knew this was the right boat. She's fast enough, she's uncomfortable enough, she has everything you need to use the ocean as a highway.
Hey, so the boys let me go grocery shopping, which may or may not have been a good idea. I got a lot of stuff, and I'm gonna make those boys eat healthy. While provisioning and repairs were wrapping up, I was able to see the vessel that would carry us over 1,000 miles to the northeasternmost port we would be allowed to go through customs on Cuba's coast.
We are here somewhere, West Palm Beach, right there. we're going to go across the stream to the middle of the Northwest Providence Channel here. We're going to come through the Providence Channel. We're going to turn right at Eleuthera, I think. We're going to come down here by Cat Island. We're going to go inside of San Salvador, flipping. We're going to come down the Crooked Passage. And we're going to end up at a place called, what's the name of that place?
Puerto Vita. Puerto Vita in Holguin Province.
It's around here somewhere.
I always like to leave at night because the winds tend to be calmer, and the first hurdle, of course, is getting across the Gulf Stream. You get a decent forecast, no big northerly coming down, nighttime's the time to go.
Coming up here, I got a red and a steaming light.
So I've been told that if we want to return to Florida safely, we have to throw a quarter overboard on the way out. So here goes. See you later, Florida. We'll be back soon. We crossed the Gulf Stream on our way east, and by the time the sun was up, I could see we were well out of sight of land. That was a first for me. We filled our time with boat work, navigation, conversation, and we took turns with chores, driving, and cooking.
Shucks. Shucks, Ash, I can't find the case, but these in here are Bush's baked beans, courtesy of the Bush family from Kennebunkport, Maine. These are fresh buns I made this morning in the bun maker. For dessert, we'll have craisins. That's about how it works here on Madam X.
I love it being out here where there's nobody else, and I'm the only actor on the stage. I think the ocean is not a barrier, it's the most incredible road. Any river, any harbor, if you keep going, you can go to any place in the world. That's what I think about the ocean. It's the biggest playing ground in the world, and there's only a few people that like to play on it, and I want to be one of them. That's all I can say.
Hey Dunk, here's your grub. Bush's baked beans.
Oh. Where are the beans? Oh, here they are.
I immediately knew I shared these sentiments and knew that I'd soon be hooked on offshore sailing for life. The clincher was when dusk fell that second night. The thing that makes this next epiphany possible is a 360-degree horizon clear of trees, buildings, hills, and other man-made objects. You see, a full moon happens when the moon rises and the sun sets on the opposite horizon at the same time. The moment I witnessed this, the Earth finally became a planet. 3, 4, 5-hour shifts at the helm shifted our pace of life. Time behind the helm, though, was made easier by having Sven there to drive for us.
When I first got the Sailomat, I picked up the phone and I called Sailomat. And the voice said, "Yeah, this is Sven. I invent Sailomat. What is your problem?" After that, it was all smooth. But it sometimes breaks. The sail of the Sailomat is adjusted to point directly into the wind. When the boat shifts its position, this goes one way or the other with the wind. And there's a lever that goes down through this tube to a vein in the water. The vein twists, and the motion of the boat creates enormous force to the right or the left. That force moves the steering head. The steering head's connected to the wheel. And you've got wind reactive steering, or boat position steering. It works pretty well.
And why do you like that better than electricity? Tell me about your relationship with electricity.
My relation with electricity is not good. I don't understand where it is. I can't see it in the wire, and it often goes wrong. And what is it? No one can explain that to me. Bottom to bottom, top to top. Are you ready, Dave?
Duncan liked to keep things simple, and this point multiplied by rigging, crew work, right on up to sleeping quarters, made us forget about life on land, where we were constantly bombarded with information and confusing that false sense of security with being knowledgeable. Salesmen are always ready to tell you what happiness is and what you need but don't own yet. Out here, there was real risk. We depended on ourselves, each other, and appreciated what we had. With first world problems falling farther and farther behind us, distance wasn't measured in commutes. It was measured by latitude. And I started to lose track of what day humans had called it. A period was now measured by the sun going up, the sun going down, and watches that got us from storm to storm.
Doesn't matter, because to stay with this, we come straight in from the top.
Tonight, northeast winds stand at 20 knots. Seas stand at 15 feet.
I was asleep. I heard this noise and more noise, and it was the main flapping and the rain coming down. It was blowing about 50. So I popped up on deck, and there was Duncan behind the wheel. And I just promptly dumped the main and dropped the jib and went back to bed. I think we all went back to bed.
Back at dawn.
It got up to about 50 knots that night. And with it being a northwesterly, we just let it blow us, sail us to the south. When the wind blows, the cradle will drop. Waking up on the 5th morning of our watery journey, we were actually thankful for the delay. It meant getting our first sight of Cuba during daylight. The smoke and mirrors that concealed Cuba from being a household word in America materialized as storm clouds, rain, and 30 knots of breeze. Where Duncan had chosen to land in the eastern part of the island, there was not a speck of evidence that humans inhabited this country. It was wild. It was untamed. It was hard to see where we were going to land.
I'll never forget this. The shore looked like a fanged reef. I mean, these pocket harbors on the east end of Cuba are all the same. They're deep and very protected harbors, but the entrances are very, very narrow. We got through and all of a sudden in, and I thought, my God, this is paradise. Then from the left side of this vision came a string of tiny little sport boats, maybe 15 feet long, run with outboard. This guy stopped and he said, "Follow me." This man was our first contact in Cuba.
Duncan, sailing us to the east end of Cuba for the first time, was wary of locals looking for money and bribes, since his 2 prior trips to the west were fraught with problems. This time he had thought ahead and brought little commodities to share instead of cold hard cash.
Gentlemen, thank you for your trouble. This will warm you up.
Thank you.
Keep it from being cold.
Muchas gracias.
Yeah. The rum?
Whiskey.
No, whiskey.
Oh my God. Ahora soy chico.
Try it.
Me cago en 10.
Tennessee.
Powerful ladies more good.
What's your name?
Eh? Antonio.
David.
Nice to meet you.
Glad to meet you too.
The little bottles of whiskey were a complete surprise to our humble hosts and got us far. I also gathered that they didn't see a lot of white chicks sail into this harbor.
Thank you, lady.
Dave is collecting our passports. And here's customs waiting for our passports. That's Yanni. Hola.
The rain continued and sequestered us on the boat as much as the customs process did.
There were great moments and there were low moments. Sometimes I was in despair. Other times, when Madam X was smoking along at 8 or 9 knots, I thought, this is what we came for. And I guess another high is, I never expected to be doing this at the age of 74, and that's a high.
We're chilling at the dock here. They have our passports, and
Yeah. We're
now at their mercy.
We're people without a country.
Yeah. When the customs process finally did begin, officials removed their shoes and boarded Madam X with forms and questions. They didn't ask for money and bribes like Duncan was accustomed to. We were instructed to never deploy our dinghy and to not allow a Cuban on board even when tied up to the dock. Without a special permit and tracking devices, Cubans are not allowed to step foot off of dry land onto a vessel of any kind.
In about an hour, this guy pedals down the dock, gets on the boat, and he was a doctor. He told us that for, I think, $15 a piece, we could get insured for the whole time we were in Cuba, for even teeth. And he told us that he made $30 a month being a doctor after going to 10 years of med school. The doctor was had been a catcher, baseball catcher in his youth, and when he discovered that we were from the Washington, Baltimore area, he piped right up and told us there was going to be a big playoff series between Holguin and Havana, which we decided we were going to go to, definitely.
I think I'm the only one who hasn't set foot on land, too. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, my dear. How are you?
Good, I'm going outside in the sunshine for the first time. Come up here. All right. Off the boat. Going up the hill to see Cuba for the first time, and you're gonna come with me. You're just gonna go real time with me right here. Let's go. Down this dock. I was told to come down this dock, up the stairs, and watch out for snakes. Literally. Oh, wow.
There's a procedure of renting a car. You have to know a person in Cuba. You can't make a phone call to an agency. But luckily, Yane, our hostess at the marina, and Daniello, the man who'd helped to guide us in, were both helpful in finding somebody who knew how to rent a car to visitors. And we showed up with the requisite money. He brought the car up, cash changed hands, papers were signed, and we got temporary ownership of a really beat-up old sedan of some kind.
So we've been doing a lot of navigating on the water. Now we're going to try to navigate on land. Let's see how this goes. Let's see this map. Where are we trying to go?
Holguin, the capital of the province.
All right.
We're here.
Okay.
We're trying to get there.
Okay. We have our skipper driving. We have our navigator navigating. We should be good.
Having a car and splitting it 3 ways worked pretty well for us. The cars cost, I think it was $70 for 3 days. And we drove that car hard and saw a lot. The first target, of course, was the baseball game.
There were no cars in the parking lot. We had no trouble parking. Two ladies sitting at a little table, and we handed the ladies 9 kooks, and she handed us 3 tickets. The stadium was packed with Cubans and Canadians.
Some of the amazing things that make it different from American baseball, it is much more personal in Cuba. Everyone seems to know every player. Everyone seems to know that every single little detail of the game counts a great deal. There's much more cheering, not just cheering with a home run or a hit, but cheering for a good pitch.
Tighten up. Here we go. Ready? Smile. Laugh. Ha ha ha. Got it. Look at you smiling.
Also, the players are slightly more theatrical than they would be in the United States. When there was a run scored, it wouldn't just be the cheering from the crowd. Every member of the team would be up along the first baseline, congratulating their hero as he came in. So the theater was there, and emotion was there, much more than in the States. So it was a great deal of fun to watch it, because you're watching not only the players, but the crowd too.
So we ordered 3 lunches, which came in a very fragile cardboard box. And I took a fork with me from the kitchen, and I was immediately told by this lady I couldn't take the fork to my seat. I promised the lady that I would bring the fork back, and she let me go. She said, "You bring that fork back before this game's over." And when the game was over and Holguin won, I stood at the kitchen and waited with the lady and the cook, because they weren't leaving, and they weren't going to let me leave until they had that fork. As she came down the steps around the corner, holding the fork high in the air, and handed it to the lady, and all was right in the world.
It was a metal fork.
It was metal. It was a metal fork, and they probably only have 6 of them.
But they don't hand out stuff like that. Most people were eating their chicken and rice with their fingers. The beauty of Cuban simplicity.
With the valuable fork returned, we got our rental car and followed the crowds that were on foot and bikes into the city of Holguin. The sun had set and the nightlife was just getting started. Everyone was looking for the next bite to eat, peso to earn, or gig to play. We were after the former and found a clean-looking place with many more forks for us to borrow. We asked a neighboring Scottish diner to join us and started to catch up on each other's stories.
Everybody's story is interesting. How they manage their life is the best story of all. And I found her very charming, and it made our evening. And we lingered too long.
We vowed to ourselves and each other that night to walk, eat, attempt to speak, and live like Cubans. The next few days, when our compass pointed south, were a continuation of the objective.
We passed pineapple fields, sugarcane plantations, little fruit stands and pizza stands.
Ox teams.
The oxen and the horses, they were unbelievable.
Bueno.
When you ask a Cuban how long it takes to get to Santiago de Cuba, you'll get another question asked right back to you. How are you going? Walking is a few days, horse is a day, hitchhiking could be any amount of time, bus is about 9 hours, rental car is 2.5 hours, but that's if you don't get a flat tire from the potholes and debris on the road.
We're in the province. The first thing I noticed about Santiago was the smell of automobile exhaust. The place stunk. You know, nobody had a catalytic converter or any of that stuff. The motors in the 50s cars, which are prevalent, have all been taken out, and they've been replaced by diesel motors, which I'd say 50% of them just smoke. Luckily, it was a seaside town, and there was plenty of breeze to get rid of it. But that is the first thing I remember about Santiago.
There was a service station, but they were not willing to sell us a fill-up of fuel. They would only sell us a particular number of liters. And luckily, the Dunnigan charm worked, and he did his arm around the shoulder chat.
Of course. Of course. This is my friend. I just met him this afternoon. He is good. The best.
Now tell me.
Give me a kiss. In the chest.
Before you know it, we've got the tank filled and we're on our way. We stopped for lunch and there were musicians up and down the street. I was hoping they wouldn't come anywhere near us. Dave came through again, because rather than them needing tips, they allowed Dave to join their band and do a couple of numbers with them.
I just thought it'd be a nice introduction to us in Santiago to join with these 3 or 4 fellows who could make unbelievable horse and horn sounds, which I can do. Like that, and we actually serenaded Duncan and Ashley.
Hey, mama, mama, my baby don't love me. Mama, mama, hey, mama, mama, my baby don't keep me. She don't keep me. Why? I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't know. I don't know why. 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 Why? I don't know.
We decided we were going to sail east, but we also decided it would be a good idea to get in the car and go look at these places to see if they're really worth sailing to, and that's what we did. And on our way to Antilla, we just made a random left and discovered a little community.
Before we left the secluded, peaceful, tropical East, we wanted to talk to any locals that would answer our questions about life in Cuba on camera. Even with the lack of modern technology that existed, most Cubans that we approached were worried about a looming big brother, especially if I replied Los Estados Unidos to the question, where are you from?
Oh, ¿cómo se llama?
I started going with German or Canadian for people to open up to us.
You have a child. Your child is born.
Yeah. I have 2 children.
And when do they start school?
5.
Before Fidel, there were places in Cuba with a 60% literacy rate. Today, school in Cuba is efficient enough to be tied for second in the world for literacy at 99.8%. Great Britain and the U.S. are tied for 9th, behind 29 other countries.
¿Cuál sujetos enseña? ¿Matemáticas o...?
Historia, lengua española, lectura.
¿Conoce su alfabeto?
And how far do they go to?
6 the primary school, the high school, 6 more, and after that the university. It's about 6 years. It depends the career you take.
The Cuban government puts 10% of their central budget toward education to ensure that every level of study, including university, is free. That doesn't mean, however, there is anything to do upon graduation.
When you finished university, what did you do?
Sometimes nothing. To go into your house.
Okay.
Because I don't have a job.
Buenas tardes. Buena, Canadá.
¿Cómo está usted?
Bien, bien.
¿Cómo se llama?
Mary.
¿Sí? Y
¿Y tú?
me llamo es Ashley,
¿De Alemania?
de Canadá.
Canadá.
Sí.
¿Vamos allí?
Sí.
Descalzo, ¿ves? Paz.
Mira, se va a quitar los zapatos.
No, tú no.
Okay.
Tú no.
¿Tiene un trabajo?
No,
¿No?
no trabajo.
¿Qué pasa su día en...
Aquí en la casa.
We learned that the minimum wage in Cuba is 225 pesos, about $9 a month. To supplement this, the government provides free education, housing, water, electricity, and subsidized medical care. The problem is there's a workforce but no workplace in Cuba.
If you have no job, how do you eat?
Yeah, the government give everybody at the end of the month some food. It's not enough for the month, but it's something. I live in a small town, and I have a lot of neighbors close my house. I don't have food, and my neighbor give me one banana and one small rice.
Ven, si tú vas a la bahía, dice Arle. A la noche, dice.
It's very nice. This is the best in Cuba, the people.
We made it to a town called Pardía, which was at one point an industrial hub, long since been left and dilapidated. I think a hurricane blew the town down.
We went to a bread store where they were selling the government bread, and then we went looking for lunch. And immediately the character of Cuba came forward because a woman approached us and said, "Come to Tony's." I followed her, and they tailed along 2 blocks away, but I was still in sight. Well, Tony's house was one of the houses along this long portico promenade with a little tiny concrete front yard, and it had no sign. It had nothing to advertise as a restaurant, but it did have Tony.
So we found Tony. He invited us into his home, and he's going to make us fish. He only has fish, which is great. I mean, it's a restaurant, yeah. He invited us in. He's going to make us, here's some, great, got some cerveza.
Good. Cinema de Holguín.
¿Es bueno?
Sí.
Tony immediately became a restaurateur in front of our eyes and showed us his 1950s radio, put on some awful music, and woke up his mother and started the restaurant. We sat there with this family, and they'd turned their home into a restaurant for us. It was a charming afternoon, interrupted by a gigantic rainstorm, which thundered and reminded them of the ciclona which had destroyed the city some 20 years ago. And it had been a railroad hub, and now it was nothing. But they had hopes. It was an ideal harbor for tourist boats. And they thought, if only the tourist boats stop, then Pardía will once again be on the map. Easterly was setting in. It was a strong, powerful wind, and we had a lot of miles to do, because our plan was to return northward and to go near Havana and then cross into the Gulf Stream.
Up until now, we'd been navigating Cuba by car, which had been somewhat straightforward. Our plan to take the favorable easterlies across the top of 42,000 square mile Cuba required a bit more preparation.
We'd discovered gradually that there wasn't going to be much gunk holing in Cuba, that you were going to go to the ports they assigned you to, or you weren't going to go. We were told either these ports were military, you can't go, or too dangerous for you, people will rob you there. Only Guillermo, one of the official entry ports, was available.
You anchor wherever you want, and then when you finish, when you get over there, call the harbor master.
On our way out of Puerto Rivita, we saw evidence of the heaviness this country lives under. The government provides as much as it can for free, but the laws make it difficult on purpose to make any money. They're just starting to let people buy and sell cars and let out spare rooms or make people meals in their dining rooms. But miles of red tape make it difficult to simply row out to go fishing. And no matter how much a farmer produces, they still make the same amount, so a lot of them walk. Without anything to export, the country gets weaker and grows even more dependent on outsiders. We still had a lot of the country to get to, and we were leaving the favorable east. The closer we got to Havana, the more tamed, occupied, and excavated it was, with arms outstretched for what has been and what will become an even bigger crutch to Cuba's economy: tourism. The American radio that we'd been just able to pick up didn't last long.
Maybe the Super Bowl is this Sunday.
The concept of a Super Bowl was becoming more and more foreign to us. We were sailing towards Guillermo, but the wind was switching and picking up in intensity. We were going to have to find shelter.
The wind was blowing hard from the north, and you want some protection on that north coast of Cuba because there's really nothing there.
This could be just local. And I found a place on the chart that looked protected from the northerly. It was called Cayo Frances, which was nothing but a little tiny island, and that's where we ended up.
Cayo Frances was a welcome surprise, but when the wind calmed down and we awoke in the morning, we found an even greater novelty.
We came in by dark last night, and we woke up not knowing where we were, but we took one step on deck. Check this out.
That boat was called the San Pedro, I think. Is that right?
San Pascual of San Diego.
San Pascual was built in San Diego in 1918. It was built of concrete. It ended up in Cuba as a submarine lookout in the Second World War. Then it became a prison ship for Che Guevara. Then it became a hotel. Then it was towed to Cayo Frances, where it is today. Just a rusting, it's not even rusting, it's just a hulk.
But it provided a perfect anchorage that night, and we were very glad to have one.
Luckily, it was a calm sleep, but the day turned into a lively cruise. Varadero was only another 100 miles away, another 100 miles of pristine, unfished, clear cruising water. By about 4 o'clock, the sun came out and we could see a Monopoly board filled with hotels marking our arrival to Varadero. The West was showing us an entirely different side of Cuba. This is what we'd prepared ourselves for. The East was untamed and more like Cuba's past. Varadero and the West is the side we'd heard was closer to the future of this country, one infiltrated by outsiders and capitalists. We weren't typical tourists, but we weren't Cubans either. We were Americans, so we wondered how we would be received. Duncan had been to this marina before and had been very generous to the staff, so they remembered him and treated us in kind. We found a more permanent slip and looked at our options. A lot of the cruisers at this dock were Canadian and spent months at this marina year after year, so they welcomed us with curious handshakes and were able to fill us in on where we had landed and the nearest towns, food, and amenities. In the morning, we saw several guards monitoring the marina and remembered how strict the rules were here about Cubans and boats. We learned that the guards were there to make sure Cubans didn't even step foot off the street into the marina. We were allowed to roam freely, however, so we began our trudge to the Strip, Varadero.
When Batista collapsed and fled in 1958 and 1959, I think Cuba was more like Florida than it is now. Now, Castro and his government are making a bold bid to restore the economy with this kind of tourism. But this kind of tourism is a strange kind of tourism. They've added this skin of hotels and protected package tours to a country which is basically disconnected from the tourist industry, disconnected physically and disconnected by class. So it's a weird feeling. It's not really Cuba. It's something else.
Cubans work in the tourist industry because of the tips and salary. When people get into a taxi or check out of a hotel and tip $5, $10, $15, that's how much a doctor or an engineer earns in a week or sometimes a month. The only thing keeping every Cuban from being in the tourist industry, though, is education. One needs to have the best possible grades to earn one of the limited spaces in the programs that teach you things like English, merchandising, accounting, and sales. This skin that is created hides the real Cuba from the top of our tour bus, and we could only see what we'd been trying our best to avoid. I could see standing inside of one of these places and not knowing what part of the world I was in. We could have been anywhere. The locals who work the strip are your only hint of where you are, and their goal is to wipe away their Spanish accents and Cuban clothes to get better and better jobs, making the separation from Cuban culture even more stark.
Hi there, my name is Pablo. I'm from Santa Clara, actually in Cuba. I'm a waiter here at the little terrace of Quebec. If you want to come by, we'll be waiting for you.
Because of this new tourist economy, there is a new division in the population. It isn't corrupt businessmen and politicians anymore. It's Cubans who have tourist industry jobs and those who don't. Even still, it's not enough to keep the country's head above water.
The people that don't have work here with the tourists, their life is very difficult.
Do you think those people in the middle of the country are happy?
Not very happy.
Up to our ears in outsiders, we desperately wanted to get back to the uncensored for tourist consumption Cuba. So we asked a fellow cruiser from Canada to show us to a shortcut across an overgrown airstrip. The only thing landing here in 2014, though, were stares from the horses on break from pulling their carts. We were literally a half a mile away from Veradero, and the only sign of it were the occasional uniforms marking maids and receptionists. They may work on the strip, but this is where they live.
Hola, buenos días.
Hola, buenos días.
Es una casa muy grande y bonita.
Buenos días.
Ya tiene 96 años.
Ah, bueno.
Ah, adelante, adelante. Yo vivo aquí ya desde chiquita.
How many live here?
Yes, 6 people.
6.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias a ustedes.
Buenas tardes.
3 weeks into this Cuban adventure, and we were getting better at finding ways to get to the roots of a culture. Commerce. How a town runs is based on how the transfer of goods and money goes. The locals had their internal economy, but Santa Marta being so close to a tourist hub, there were still solicitors via taxi rides, the trinket business, straight up asking for money in exchange for a photo.
No good?
Not good. $1. $5 no plus una foto.
¿Qué es su historia?
Oh.
¿Qué es su historia?
Mi historia. Renaldo Alfonso Pardía, hijo de Dulce María y Rolando. Nací en Santa Clara.
You know any good songs?
Quiero mucho a los canadienses porque son muy buenos. Mejor los canadienses que no rusos.
¿Puedo cantar?
Cantar con él. Yo quiero mucho a los canadienses cuando son mis amigos, que lo quiero mucho. Lo adoro, lo beso, lo abrazo. Canadá, viva Canadá, viva Canadá.
Viva Baltimore.
Well, viva
Baltimore.
Baltimore.
In spite of the embargo, which has gone on for over 50 years, Cubans don't seem to resent the United States. In fact, many of them that I talked with in my broken Spanish blamed their own government as much as the United States for the standoff, which has created such havoc with the economy. In fact, it sometimes seems that Castro was very good at revolution, but not very good at what comes afterward. What are you going to do with all the people after they've found their freedom?
Ashley and I were lucky enough to run into a guy and his wife who were rebuilding a 1965 Ford Falcon in his garage, at her garage. And when we got there, he was rebuilding, I think he was rebuilding a door panel. put a new Cabuto 4-cylinder diesel engine in it, and he was getting ready to put it on the road. It seemed to me that his wife was pretty proud of the work he was doing and getting a little damn impatient.
When this car was ready, they could use it, sell it, or even become a taxi service, which helped remind us how resourceful Cubans are and how little goes to waste. Buenos días. ¿Qué estás haciendo?
Arreglamos zapatos para sobrevivir.
Maybe being cruisers, traveling with minimal luxuries, washing our clothes by hand, and living in tight quarters brought us in closer alignment with the locals, but we felt a camaraderie with those in the small towns. We wondered how different a big city like Havana would feel. One of the things you notice when exploring Cuba by car is one of the effects of communism. The only advertising you see at sporting events on the sides of the road in newspapers are for the government.
To get into Havana, you got to go underneath the entrance to the harbor through a tunnel, and boom, you're in Havana. And I can tell you, when we parked that car and I got out of it, I was in shock. Because we parked on a road that was about as wide as my thumb. You could see at the far end of it the Capitol building, which was being rebuilt, but the buildings went up 3-4 stories tall in old Havana. It was like every street was like being in a tunnel.
It's a very dense 18th century city that has been in disrepair for almost a century, and it's got unbelievable charm for the first hour, and then the charm begins to fade a little bit because it is so filthy and so decrepit.
Decrepit as Havana was, there was still so much soul and so much passion. Whether gutter, window, bus, rooftop, or face, every second was an entire life going on. Every inch had a story.
My brother lives in Florida, Tampa.
Our story became the search everyone in the city shared. Where do we find food and where do we find shelter?
A tiny little restaurant, one doorway wide, is serving up street food, and you don't really dare try it because who knows what's in it.
Yeah, we ended up following Duncan to an outdoor cafe, and after yet another variation on rice and beans, it was time to find a place to stay for the night.
And for this, the barrio is excellent. There's a government program that allows these householders to rent a room, and they put out a little sign, notably with an anchor on it. For a very few pesos, you can rent a room from any of these officially recognized rental homes. We got into these old houses and began to see how the whole thing works. The floors are slightly tilting. The buildings seem to be falling toward one another. They're open courtyard inside and a very narrow row house building. Outside, chaos of the barrio. Inside, someone's home that you're invited into. And that has a lot of charm for us.
We are here in Old Havana. It's a beautiful place to live. I lived here almost 75 years. And I'm proud. Please, I'm proud. Yeah.
And how did you learn such good English?
I like American music, so I heard Nat King Cole, Dean Martin, Perry Como, around 54.
What's the difference between Old Havana and New Havana?
Old Havana has a special touch, you know. all the buildings, even from centuries ago. It's like the past living now. It's not only my country, it's my neighborhood. You see? So I'm very proud.
And what is your job?
My job is to keep this parking area from vehicles not belonging to the bank. This is a bank. And so I keep an eye on it.
This gentleman, along with the guards at the entrances to hotels, our marina, and restaurants, were examples of jobs that keep Cubans even more separated from tourists. He was very helpful, though, giving us ideas on where to go in the city and where to listen to live music in Havana.
We went from corner to corner listening for bars. They're all open to the street, and most bars in the old city have a musical unit that just appears and starts playing, and they play all night. Bands get together and they start playing. It's a way for them to make money, and it's a way for the whole neighborhood to join in. It's something that Cuba does brilliantly well, because I think one of the reasons it doesn't cost anything to play their instruments, and they're very skilled musicians, and they have beautiful voices, and they have a great repertoire of songs that they all know and can sing. I remember one bar, it was late at night, and the band was playing at full energy, and there was a crowd outside that wasn't paying for drinks or anything, but they were as much of the audience as the people inside of the tables like us who were paying for the music, and the musicians didn't care. They were so full of energy, and their momentum had gotten to such a point that they just simply were playing for the joy of it, it seemed.
Musicians haven't always had it so easy. When it was illegal for citizens of Cuba to travel within Cuba, police spent time rounding up musicians who snuck into Havana to play to send them back out into the other provinces from which they came. Those rules have relaxed, but crime is still present, mostly in the form of drugs and prostitution. But we always felt safe wherever we were and always saw law enforcement bored and their time unoccupied. Plus, the warnings from the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Diplomatic Security said pickpockets and purse snatchers usually targeted rich-looking people. So our old t-shirts, salted by weeks of living on a boat, was perfect camouflage. Before we left Havana, there was just one very touristy thing I just had to do. I couldn't resist.
Finally getting my taxi ride.
There was a turquoise 1949 Chevrolet Style Line Deluxe convertible with 3 on the tree that was calling to me. Plus, the driver had the right price and the right attitude, letting me bring all the cameras to show off this breezer. It was a classy way to say goodbye to Havana and to meet up with the boys at a designated location outside of the city.
Ready? Okay, right now?
We met up successfully and proceeded to get hopelessly lost on our way back to Madam X.
He doesn't know.
Most people we asked barely knew where they were, and others were only willing to help us if we gave them a lift or money.
Okay, let's go.
Let's go. Go now.
When we get to the circle, it'll be there.
Thank you.
We eventually made it back, though, and started to make preparations to check out of Cuba. With thanks given in all directions, we went through customs and got sniffed for extraneous cargo.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We then exited the marina the same way we entered, but with a little more knowledge about the way Cuba is failing and succeeding.
It's somehow refreshing and a reminder of the important things in life to see a civilization that has no money and no conveniences, no cell phones and no good roads. It makes you understand how governments make a huge difference and not always for the better.
The future is uncertain for this untamed country. The impending evolution of U.S. policy toward Cuba could mean big things for its economy because, unfortunately, the reasons we fell in love with Cuba are the exact reasons why it will need to change. The hotel and restaurant infrastructures are already over capacity, and the average wealthy tourists who are planning trips south won't be looking to rent a rusty sedan, stay in someone's home, or eat in someone's living room like we did. And with so much incentive for citizens to become waiters, policymakers will need to figure out a way to make it more lucrative to become a doctor for the country to attain some level of independence. If everyone is the same, everyone is poor. When you deposit money into the equation, the wealth has to go somewhere. Us three amigos easily got Madam X onto the conveyor belt, otherwise known as the Gulf Stream, and we were soon back in the groove of watches and reading compasses. Heading is 3530. And that's Venus up there. She rose about an hour ago and the sun's about to come up. The farther we got, the more English we heard on the radio.
East winds 5 to 10 miles an hour. Sunday night.
Chatter from ships mostly as we passed by them in the wee hours of the morning.
United States Coastal Sector Minnesota. United States Coastal Sector Minnesota.
This was not a place to be floating as a Cuban, so we hoped our American flag was big enough to see. By the time the sun set again, the lights of Miami twinkled on the horizon and unexpected guests elected themselves our welcoming committee. From shore to shore, we only had 37 hours to contemplate where we had been and what we would tell others about our journey. Cuba's people are poor, but they're also quick to share what little they have. Their infrastructure is primitive, but it makes you slow down. The architecture is a bit dirty, but full of soul and history. It can't be said any clearer than by the old man who learned English by listening to Perry Como. The past is living now. We had found some inspiring people, documented as much as we could, had our eyes open to other ways of life, and reflected back on how we live our own. We'd driven about 1,000 kilometers around Cuba and surely didn't even scratch the surface of the beauty, whimsy, and mystery of this land. We'd sailed just over 1,000 miles and saw only a fraction of the coastline. We'd spent 3.5 weeks confined to a 40-foot boat, but that was anything but limiting. It was easy getting to know each other and growing to depend on one another through all the storms, paperwork, and hours with stories shared to fill the time. This was a story, one that we three will be sharing for the rest of our lives. When you drive on a paved road or walk on a sidewalk, somebody's already been there. When you sail offshore, you could be the first person to travel that route. This trip gave us a glimpse of how the early fishermen and explorers must have felt, and I want to continue finding that risk, that danger, and that reward.